had a pretty bad birthday last year. My partner had planned a wonderful day that included a ride on a choo-choo train. I love choo-choo trains through the redwoods of Felton, California. But when we arrived, it was canceled due to extremely high winds. We call redwood limbs widowmakers here, the choo-choo train ticket taker informed us. No problem. So instead, we drove further on until we reached Santa Cruz, where we had planned to have a nice lunch. Unfortunately, the high winds had knocked out all the power to Santa Cruz, and so everything was closed. Eventually, we found a brewery that was open, and as we sat down and I took my first sip of beer, I got a text from a neighbor showing videos she just shot from her car coming home on the highway. Wow, that's a nasty looking fire, I thought, but at least it's not in our backyard, so I kept drinking my beer. About 20 minutes later, I started getting a bunch more texts from other neighbors and alerts from the excellent app Watch Duty informing me that nearby neighborhoods were now evacuating because those same extremely high winds were spreading the fire quickly. We abandoned our beers, hopped back in the car for a very anxious 2-hour drive home, during which time I fielded several calls from neighbors and friends asking if Indy was home alone and whether they should break into the house to rescue him. Luckily, he was with us. We got home, we loaded up the car with our emergency earthquake kit, our go bags, and our camping gear for good measure, and then we sat and waited, chatting with neighbors and keeping an eye on the app to be ready to go if the fire made it any closer. We were very lucky. Our awesome firefighters worked tirelessly all day and night to get the fire under control. Plane after plane flew overhead, dropping retardant, and the winds died down. The fire was contained, and only a few houses were damaged, and no one died. This didn't come as a huge shock. We were aware that this might happen when we bought our house. Much of the Bay Area is at high risk of wildfire and also earthquakes. So we've always had an emergency plan. And honestly, even though it happened on my fucking birthday, it was a great test to confirm that we've prepared as best as we can. Our home's exterior is clear of potential fuel. We knew where all of our supplies were. We had good communication with neighbors and with authorities, and we were as ready as we could have been. Obviously, I'm thinking of all this now because of the horrific, deadly fires in Los Angeles. I have several friends there who had to evacuate. Luckily, they are all okay, and most of their homes were spared. But I've heard of a lot of people who were caught completely by surprise by this. They had no go bags, no earthquake kit, no plan. And so I wanted to open this video by urging you out there in YouTube land to please don't be that person. I made a little joke on social media that I actually do sort of believe that Alex Jones and his ilk have convinced a lot of normal people that prepping is something crazy people do. And yeah, crazy people do prep in silly ways for scenarios that will never occur. They stock up on guns because transgender zombies are coming for their children, or they fill their entire garage with precious metals because the world's financial markets are going to crash, but you'll still be able to barter for gold somehow. But normal people should prep for actual scenarios that might happen. Here in the Bay Area, that means wildfires and earthquakes. When I lived in Boston, that meant power outages and an inability to leave the apartment during a blizzard. When I was growing up in South Jersey, it meant thunderstorms that could take out the power and create flooding. When I lived in Buffalo, New York, I was headed out on a winter road trip with my boyfriend at the time, and I was so confused when at the last minute he ran back in the apartment and came out with a quilt and a handful of chocolate bars. That's how I learned that the trunk of my car should always have a first aid kit, a blanket, and a brick of chocolate, because when that lake effect snow hits, people drive off the road and then freeze or starve to death in their cars. Did I ever need that? No. Do people die all the time because they don't have that? Unfortunately, yeah. So please, 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 please think about where you live and what's the worst thing that could reasonably happen and make a plan. If you have questions, check to see if you have a local community emergency response team for information like what sort of stuff should go into an emergency kit. Even if you live in a place with no potential natural disasters, congratulations, you could probably benefit from just having a backpack with things like a change of clothes, an extra bottle of medication, a flashlight, and some granola bars. Seriously, shit happens. Okay, end of lecture. Let's talk about some LA wildfire conspiracy theories. We all know by now that when something big and scary happens, conspiracies start flying around social media. And we also know that that's only getting worse with a lack of fact-checking now on those social media networks. Gavin Newsom, the state of California's unctuous used car salesman / governor, jumped on this pretty quickly by publishing a page of simple fact checks. No, the fire department's budget was not cut. No, the state didn't stop trucks from Oregon from driving in to help. No, there isn't a water shortage right now. The reservoirs aren't empty. No, California's politicians did not purposely start the fires to hide vast pedophile tunnels. And no, the fire did not start because of a satanic ritual. Really, guys, it was just a regular secular ritual, which took place in the pedophile tunnel, yes, but it wasn't on purpose. One of the children tried to escape, and the standard punishment flamethrower accidentally lit up some cum tissues, which drifted into the HVAC unit. Sorry, something about the governor of California needing to officially state that a devastating wildfire was not connected to secret pedophile tunnels really brings out my darkest humor. There's one sort of conspiracy I've seen floating around that isn't addressed on that page, though, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. It's the idea that one reason these fires were so devastating is because one wealthy couple has hoarded all of California's water to grow pistachios. This, to me, is a perfect example of catchy misinformation because it sounds reasonable. It criticizes people who are objectively terrible, and it has a kernel of truth at its core. But in the end, it is in fact bullshit. Linda and Stuart Resnick have no direct connection to these wildfires. As of the recording of this video, authorities are still trying to nail down exactly how these fires started, whether it was intentional arson or whether our state's power monopoly, PG&E, had another oopsie or something else. But it's pretty well understood how and why it spread so catastrophically. The Santa Anas are hot and dry winds that occur about a dozen times a year in Southern California, usually in the autumn, but they're common at other times as well. Usually by this point in the year, places have experienced some amount of winter rain, which is why January is generally not considered fire season in Southern California or here in the Bay Area. Unfortunately, LA did not get any rain this winter, which is something that is becoming more common thanks to climate change. Extremely dry vegetation combined with extremely strong, dry, hot winds is a recipe for disaster. It's what nearly burned down my neighborhood last October, which is the edge of fire season. This is such a known problem that we are used to getting red flag warnings, usually a few days in advance of winds like that, which serve as a notice to, double check your emergency kit, power up your devices, gas up your car, or charge up your car. This is California, and be ready to get out of your house. These days, PG&E will even shut down the power in high-risk areas like mine because they know that their terrible infrastructure that they refuse to repair might cause sparks, which can combine with those conditions to make for an out-of-control wildfire. And thanks to those high winds, it becomes extremely dangerous and sometimes impossible to get aircrafts up over the fires to release water or fire retardants, which again is how they stopped the fire in my neighborhood in October. They could only do that because the winds died down enough. In the conditions that LA experienced, it almost doesn't even matter how much water you have. You might save my house or my neighbor's house, but the guy next to them, you can't save. And once it goes up, those strong winds come along and pick up a single spark and can carry them 5 miles away to find another house or a grove of eucalyptus trees that are going to explode. Saying that more water would have stopped the LA fires is like saying a bigger bucket would have stopped the Titanic from sinking. I'll pause here to point out that despite that fact, more water would have helped. After all, if more water would save just my house, even if it doesn't stop the wildfire, even if it doesn't save my neighbor's house, then yeah, I want more water. If a big enough bucket bails out a boat long enough to save just one extra person, then yeah, having that bigger bucket is great. For that reason, I'm glad that the state of California is funding an independent investigation to figure out why, for instance, one major reservoir has been empty for nearly a year for otherwise what seems to be relatively simple repairs. Would that reservoir have stopped these wildfires? No. Might it have saved an extra person's house? Maybe. We should look into that. But to get back to the conspiracy theory, that is not the fault of the Resnicks or any other billionaires stealing water. But the reason why that's so easy to believe is because the Resnicks and other billionaires are, in fact, stealing our water. I showed the first post in this thread on Shitter from someone listing information about the Resnicks and their nefarious deeds, and that thread is largely correct. Instead of reading it, though, I'm going to direct you to this excellent overview from a climate scientist at Union of Concerned Scientists, who themselves include links to several indigenous people and organizations who have been on this beat for decades. That's an important perspective because the topic of water rights in California dates back to the colonization of this state and the invention of appropriative rights. On the East Coast, colonizers used riparian rights, meaning that the white guy who owned the property that bordered the river also owned the rights to use that river for whatever purposes he wanted. But appropriative rights granted people the right to nail a sign to a tree next to a river saying, hey, that water's mine now. And then they could funnel it several miles inland to water their own crops. The first person, or the first U.S. citizen, which did not include indigenous people at first, to nail up that sign got the rights to the water, provided that they continued to use it. It's a long and sordid tale over the 150 years or so since those rights were established, and I encourage you to read up on it if you're interested. But the end result is now a system in which more than 1 million Californians do not have access to safe drinking water, while billionaires own agricultural conglomerates that can continue to grow water-heavy crops like almonds and pistachios, even when the state is in a severe drought. And to be clear, these private corporations are using public resources to make their billions of dollars. As even Forbes has noted, back in the 90s, the Resnicks engaged in secret meetings with officials to acquire public land for its water rights, eventually resulting in them owning a majority stake in the Kern County Water Bank, which is an underground water storage facility that was set up originally with $73 million in taxpayer money as a protective measure against droughts. Now it is used to grow pistachios for billionaires. So this isn't about the availability of water to fight fires. It is about the availability of water for people to drink, or the water available to our fellow friends in the food system like salmon, which require rivers to spawn and thrive and feed us. When you drive through the Central Valley, you see loads of signs the billionaires put up on their farms claiming that they need the water to feed us. But unlike those salmon, the nuts they're growing are mostly being shipped out of the country. The Central Valley does grow a huge amount of food that people across the United States eat, but there are obviously huge inequities in how the water is used and even which farmers get to use it. Here's a hint. If your farm isn't owned by billionaires, good luck getting that water to your crops. So that's the kernel of truth at the center of that bullshit popcorn that is blame the Resnicks for the wildfires. We can blame them for a lot, and hell, we can even indirectly tie them back into the wildfires because the actual cause is climate change and lack of municipal readiness for the effects of climate change. And that you can always tie back to billionaires in general. In case I haven't been clear, billionaires are a plague upon the earth. But linking them directly to this particular catastrophe isn't resulting in any increase in understanding. Instead, it's just stoking more dangerous ideas, unfortunately, like good old anti-Semitism. For instance, here's one neo-Nazi retweeting that anti-Resnick post to say, cherchez les juifs, or look for the Jew. And of course, because it's Shitter, the other anti-Semites have hopped on board. So please just double check the posts you're boosting on social media, especially if it's something that you agree with, because those are the sneakiest ones. And especially if you don't actually live here in California and you don't deal with these problems on a regular basis. If you do live here in California, please go ahead and let your politicians know how you feel about the inequity in water rights and about the lack of preparation for droughts, which are only going to become more extreme as climate change marches on. And you know what? While you're at it, why not let them know how you feel about PG&E? Because even if it turns out that they didn't cause this, they're probably going to cause another one soon. I think we can all agree that they suck ass and they should be destroyed. Like Billionaires. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.